Welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! History with Joe Giorlando. In today's video, Sean and I are going to play the 2003 Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship. This is an especially exciting video for me to make because I played in 2003. However, unlike the previous videos and the previous deck profiles as a whole, I haven't gone back and actually played this format in forever. I legitimately stopped playing this format when the ban list came out that switched over to the next one. I have both in person and then obviously online gone back and played Go Control. I've gone back and played Teledown format. I've gone back and played all of those old formats. I have never played a format so authentic to my childhood, so this is a really exciting video. I decided to play the first place deck. Sean, I think, is playing another one of the decks, more of a beatdown variant, so we're going to see cards like Goblin, Attack Force, and Gemini Elf and Mechanical Chaser in his variant. I'm just running the 3 Gemini Elf. So we'll see what this original sort of old school vintage Yu-Gi-Oh! Looked like. So taking a look here at my hand, we have Mystic Tomato and Witch of the Black Forest. The Tomato, in theory, would search either Sangan or Witch in this deck, or Donzalug, and then allow me to then search, if it was with Sangan or Witch, Yata Garasu, and then that's also what Witch of the Black Forest could search. I'm playing a very hand control centric build, that's why you see a copy there of Drop Off. I think, let's see here. So against a beatdown deck, you definitely don't want to just open with Gemini Elf because I don't have any protective trap cards, and if you just summon Goblin Attack Force, that would be inconvenient. I mean, I could definitely respond by attacking over it with Witch, but that's definitely inconvenient. I think the best turn 1 play is going to be to put Mystic Tomato on the board. I'm going to summon it in attack mode to play around Nobleman of Crossout. I think I could actually check the exact deck list to verify if there's Nobleman, but I think the proper play is to just summon it in attack mode. I also shouldn't assume that my opponent's running the deck that he's running. If we actually go and look at the deck list, he's running Van Messem's deck from the Netherlands. It actually has Fissure in it, so this is incorrect in the sense that I know he has Fissure in his deck, but I'm going to assume that I don't know what he's running and summon it in attack mode and play around the Nobleman that's actually not in his deck. And then once it's clear that he's running this beatdown deck, I will play accordingly. So I'm going to summon the Mystic Tomato. My hope is that the tomato either lives or it gets attacked over, and I can search Donzalug or Sangan, and then on the following turn I can, oh, oops, I'm going to drop off. And then on the next turn I can maybe crash the Gemini Elf if he has a Gemini Elf, or if he has a Mechanical Chaser I can attack over it. All right, so there's the Goblin Attack Force. The risk with drop off in especially game 1 is Sinister Serpent. If he's running this exact beatdown deck and he didn't change anything, then there are no Sinister Serpents, so that's actually fine. He does have the Fissure. Okay. Yeah, so going forward, I'm no longer going to play around Nobleman of Crossout. Oof. All right, yeah, that's a thing. That is a thing. Luckily for me, I have a few different ways of dealing with that, so that's not too bad. All right. No spell and trap cards. So I'm going to go to my turn now. Skip the draw. I will summon the Witch, and I will attack for 1100. Going into main phase 2. I could play Mirage and then set Heavy Storm. I'd get 1 extra card out of that. I think that's probably reasonable at this point. Yeah. So now during my opponent's standby phase, I'm going to draw to 3 cards in hand. Let's see if he has Typhoon in the standby in his draw phase. That would be the only time that he could counter this. He does, in fact, now that I've verified which deck he is running, playing 2 copies of Mystical Space Typhoon. So he could in draw phase. Are you kidding? He says in the chat. All right. I'm going to even ask him if he has MST in draw phase. That way he's cleared how that interaction works. All right, so now we're in standby phase, so now I'm going to draw to 3 cards. So the way this works, really, what you're trying to accomplish is I'm trying to draw my own Mystical Space Typhoon, and then during my draw phase on the following turn, I can use an MST that I drew off of Mirage to destroy my own Mirage of Nightmare. And then I invested in MST and Mirage of Nightmare and ended up drawing 3 cards that stayed in my hand. Otherwise, as currently constituted, during my standby phase, I'm going to have to discard 3, which means this Mirage of Nightmares sort of net neutral. It's not actually gaining me card advantage, but it is digging me to the 3 MSTs that were in this deck. So we'll see what I draw here off the top. Draw. All right, I'm going to shuffle, and I'm going to discard 3. All right, number 1 is Dark Hole. Number 6, nothing. Number 1 is Nobleman. And number 1 is Gemini Elf. All right, so now we're going to go into main phase 1. I think here the options are to set my Graceful and Ring and then go into my next turn or his next turn and draw 4 off the Mirage of Nightmare. With his deck, now that we've verified what it is, that set monster is either Spirit Reaper, Fiber Jar, or a Cyber Jar, or Sangan, I guess, are all the options. I really do not have anything now that my Nobleman is gone that can help me against a set Cyber or Fiber Jar. Both of those are going to have pretty great game-breaking effects right now. Just checking. Actually, I have Regeki. Touche. I actually have Regeki. My Dark Hole is gone. Dark Hole would have been the other way of dealing with a set monster. And to a lesser extent, Change of Heart. Change of Heart's not really going to do anything in this particular situation if I were to draw it. So the question here is, do I Graceful Charity? I think the answer to that is yes, because I am both willing to dig for the MST so this Mirage of Nightmare gets full value next turn. I'm also trying to continue digging for Sinister Serpent, or I could just set them both. The risk here is that both Harpies and Heavy Storm are legal, so if I were to set both of these and lose them to a Heavy or Harpies next turn, that's kind of inconvenient. I could attack and see what this is, because if this is Fiber Jar, I would like to know that. Theoretically, with Fiber Jar, you actually want your opponent to flip it on their turn. That way, they draw 5, and then you draw 5, but then you get the first draw phase. So you do technically go up 1 card, though they then have the first opportunity to use power spells and hand disruption. So it is a little bit of a caveat there that it's not always necessarily the best. It's almost as if, would you still go first in this format if you did not draw 6 cards? You might actually still go first. So attacking into Fiber Jar is not necessarily the worst either. I think after all of this consideration, I'm just going to attack this face down. I've decided not to play the Graceful Charity. I want to see if this is one of those jars. I already checked his deck list and he's not running Morphing Jar. Oh, okay. Sweet. All right. So now that that's the case, I am actually going to set Graceful and Ring. I think he would have played one of the destruction back row cards like Harpies or Heavy on their previous turn. I guess I can technically chain Ring on the Witch. That's not the greatest thing in the world, but it is possible. We'll see what happens. So if I get the standby phase, I'll get to draw 4. I will ask if he has MST again. The beauty here is, he has to draw MST to avoid me drawing these 4 cards. But if he just MSTs the Mirage of Nightmare, well, we just went 1 for 1, and that's totally reasonable. And I got to dig through my deck. But here I did, in fact, draw the MST, so that's good. In my upcoming draw phase, I can use the MST from my hand to destroy my own Mirage of Nightmare, and then I'll get to keep this full hand. So you see here, I have a pretty reasonable hand advantage over him. We both have 4 cards in hand, but I have 5 cards on the board. Now, granted, I'm going to invest 2 of them, the MST and my face-up Mirage, next turn. So although it looks like I'm overwhelmingly ahead in card advantage, I'm definitely ahead, but it's not as overwhelming as it might look. In his hand, we know he has Yata Garasu that we established earlier. He got a Yata shot in. He set this back row on the previous turn. We, on the previous turn, did not activate any spell cards. In his deck list, he has both Magic Drain and Solemn Judgment, so it could be possible that he has one of those. He just set a new back row and passed. We're going to go now to my draw phase and activate MST on my Mirage of Nightmare. Now, he could play Magic Drain on this. I could actually even see him using Solemn Judgment on this, but we'll see. If he uses Solemn, I have to discard 3 cards here, go down to only 1 in hand, so he might consider doing that. The reason you wouldn't do that is there are literally 3 MSTs in this deck, so I will eventually get to destroy my own Mirage. Though he has a couple counters in his deck here that he could use. Yep, he is thinking. So he definitely has some type of counter, which is totally fine. I'm in an interesting position here where, I can Graceful Charity. I could ring this if I wanted. I could flip Heavy. But I'm fine just playing with this Mirage of Nightmare for a little while. His deck is not a devoted Yata deck. So just sitting here and incrementally gaining value over time with Mirage is totally reasonable. All right, so Mirage goes to the graveyard. So now standby phase occurs. I have nothing to discard because Mirage is not on the board anymore. And now I can go into my main phase 1. So let's see here. So I'm inclined to start getting some of these back rows off the board. You know, I think playing this Graceful Charity is pretty reasonable. He might Magic Drain that, which is okay. I don't really care about either Snatch Steal or Regeki. And then if he were to allow this Graceful Charity to go through, now this Heavy Storm threatens to really get some good value on here. So I think starting with Graceful Charity is pretty reasonable. I wouldn't mind drawing into, obviously, Sinister Serpent, but even just a card like Yata is pretty nice. So if I draw into Yata, that would be pretty decent. I could, doesn't seem like super convenient, but I could ring the Witch. He would search a beater, and then I'd be able to Regeki the beater on the next turn, and then summon Yata directly. It seems like because he has yet to summon another monster, like a Mechanical Chaser or a Gemini Elf, that he probably doesn't have any of those in hand. He might be sitting there with one of those hands where it's like Regeki, which I assume his deck runs. I'm going to just quickly check real quick. But I could see his hand being something like, let's see here, Regeki. Yep, absolutely in his deck. Maybe his deck has some 3 equip cards. It has a mage, no, it has 2 Acts of Despairs and a United We Stand. So it actually has some equip cards. He could be holding some of those. Those don't do anything to the Yata lock. So I'm actually partially incentivized to get into the Yata lock pretty quick. I could also flip Heavy Storm here, bait out whatever this happens to be, Snatch Steal the Witch, ring and destruction my own Witch, search my own Yata, and then see if that just wins the game. I think there's actually a reasonable chance that I would win the game doing that. I'd even be able to set Call the Haunted, which is pretty decent. Yeah, I think that's actually what I'm going to try and do. I'm going to play with Graceful first, see what he does. Then I'm going to try and Heavy Storm and ring my Witch to search my Yata, and then Snatch Steal and then attack with everything. Did he say, okay, yeah, all right. So draw 3, 1, 2, 3. Now that's really good. Imperial Order is really good. Dawn's actually really good too. I don't think I need Mystic Tomato anymore. I have both Sanguine and Witch and Dawn's Allude, so I think the Mystic Tomato is the least useful of these. I also think the Sanguine in my hand is not great, not necessary. I have all of the monsters I need. His deck only runs Mirror Force in terms of protection. Yeah, I think it's fine to play this Heavy Storm. Reasonable chance that he has Soul Arm or Magic Drain, but if he Magic Drains, I'm fine just discarding the Regeki. Yeah. I think at this point I'm okay discarding the Regeki. I'm pretty sure if he had something like Gemini Elf, he would have flipped it. And if he at least had Gemini Elf as opposed to Goblin Attack Force, I can crash with the Call of the Haunted. So yeah, I'm going to flip this Heavy Storm. The Pro Storm that was never intended to be a Pro Storm. It was just a Heavy Storm set with Mirage of Nightmare. So let's see if this goes through. If he passes this back, I'm going to ring my Witch. Yeah, so I'm going to ring the Witch. All right, he says okay to that. So we both take 1,100. I will now search my deck for Yata. I will summon Yata and play Snatch Steal. Inconvenient here that if I Imperial Order, he's going to get his Witch back. But it is what it is. We'll attack and set 2. Go to end phase and add Yata back to my hand. So if he summons a beater, that's not the end of the world. He kills his Witch, and then I at least can Regeki and then attack with either Yata or honestly Dawn on that following turn. If it's a Gemini Elf beater, that's the best case scenario because then I can call and crash. And then whatever he searches off of Witch, I can just Regeki. Like, for example, if he decides to search Cyber or Fiber Jar, if he can get this Witch off the table. I'm riding him to gain 1,000 life points. I'm pretty sure in a previous video earlier this week, I played Sean and he forgot to do that in another format, in the Machine Beatdown format. So I want to make sure we do not make that mistake in this 2003 format. So he was asking me if he should play it out. So he ended up scooping. So that play that I talked about ended up working out. The only way he would have stopped that is if he played the Solemn Judgment on the ring, but I don't think it was very clear that he should have done that. I mean, maybe the idea of ringing your own monster should indicate that there was the potential, but I think that was totally reasonable. Are we siding? I'll tell him sure, why not? We have sides. We're being as authentic as possible. Now, unfortunately, the deck that he's using is only 39 cards in the archives of Yu-Gi-Oh! History. The 40th card in his deck is unknown, and we could not confidently pinpoint what that 40th card was. He ended up putting the Forceful Sentry in his deck, which I think is the most likely card because he has Confiscation in the side and no Forceful in the main. And if Forceful is legal and your deck's running Solemn Judgment, I would definitely run Forceful before I put Confiscation in either the main or side deck. So that's the 40th card that he's using. But in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Archives, the deck that Sean is running does not have a 40th card, but it does have a side deck. So this is authentic to the time period. So looking at my side deck, I don't have a ton for this matchup. If this was a fully themed Yata lock deck like I'm running with Drop Off, you put in these Electric Snakes because your opponent has Drop Off, to a lesser extent Confiscation, and then of course Delinquent Duo. In terms of what I'm looking at here, the Book of Moons are decent. He's running a Beatdown deck. I think the Nobleman could be cut. He has Witch Sangin and then Cyber and Fiber Jar that he would likely set. And as powerful as Fiber and Cyber Jar is, I don't know if I want to put Nobleman in there. You know, holding Nobleman when they have literally 9 Beatdown monsters, 3 Goblin Attack Force, 3 Gemini Elves, and 3 Mechanical Chasers seems rough. In matter of fact, actually, these Torrential Tributes actually sound really good because of that. So I'm going to switch one of those out. I will switch out maybe Change of Heart. Change of Heart is useful if he puts 2 monsters with the same attack points on the board and I can crash them. That's really great. This Kaiku is really bad. His deck does not run Sinister Serpent, and Kaiku gets run over by every single monster in his deck, so that's definitely a swap, no doubt. So we'll put in the second Torrential. I really want to put in all 3 Torrentials, to be honest with you. Let's see. What else can be cut? Harpane Heavy's kind of interesting because with the Magic Drains, they're a little annoying. My opponent is running 3 Magic Drains, 3 Solemn, and 1 Mirror Force. That's it for traps. So it's kind of interesting that the only trap card that can stop a push is going to be Mirror Force. So if I'm ever able to attack with Yata, it's almost always going to go through, so that's pretty exciting. And though from the side deck, he has, I guess, Magic Cylinder and his own Torrential. Let's see. Jinzo. Jinzo's a little questionable. I guess you could cut Jinzo. It makes Call, Preem, and Reborn way worse. But his deck has double Fissure in it, which obviously if I have another monster, it's not likely to kill Jinzo. But his deck's also running cards like Axe of Despair. So even if I put Jinzo on the field, it's pretty likely that it's just going to die. I'd much rather have a Torrential Tribute in my deck. Much rather have Torrential Tribute in my deck. The other question is, do I want any of the Book of Moons or Scapegoat package? Scapegoat can do a decent job keeping me alive. I don't think so, though. I think everything else in here is pretty solid. Drop-offs are great. He's not running Sinister or Electric Snake in the side. He's running plenty of cards, including equip cards that Imperial Order does really well against. Bringing Mirror Force is solid. Call the Haunted is still fine. Maybe Premature. I'd rather call over Premature because you can chain this to stuff like MST and search off a Sangin or a Witch. Premature is a little questionable. I mean, what am I actually going to be Prematuring in this matchup? If he has a big monster on the field, there's almost nothing that I'd want to Premature. The only thing I'd really want to Premature is Don Zalug if I can get that attack in. Would I rather have the ability to do that or a Scapegoat? It's an interesting question. I think I'm going to keep it the way it is, and if I draw a Premature in a bad place, maybe I'll reflect on that a little bit more. I mean, maybe I should. I mean, his deck's running so many equip cards. We'll see. We'll keep it this way. Let's see what happens. The first 3 cards actually looked like cards that you would see in some of the previous decks that we've been profiling. Then the last 2 are 2 cards that had been on the ban list for a long time. I think Witch might be unbanned now. Don't quote me on that. I don't honestly know. I bet with Witch's current effect, it might be unbanned on the current Yu-Gi-Oh! Ban list, but with its original effect, it was on the ban list forever. Or what seemed like forever. Pretty good hand, all things considered. I've got a Dark Hole to counteract his Beatdown monsters, a Torrential that can stymie, obviously, the Beatdown plan. Forceful Sentry that I'm going to use on turn 1 just to get a sense of what my opponent has. Then Witch of the Black Forest. As we established in that previous game, that first turn I had to decide if I wanted to set or summon the Mystic Tomato. Unsure exactly what version of his deck he was running. He is in fact running the Fissure Beatdown version, so from this point forward, I'm just going to set Mystic Tomato if I were to happen to draw it. All right, so I drew the second Torrential. Pretty good. I think my first turn here is fairly scripted. I think I'm just going to play Forceful Sentry. If this is Magic Drain, I'm willing to ditch the Mystical Space Typhoon and just get a sense of what my opponent's holding. And then I'm going to set the Witch and pass with the Torrential. Maybe I can bait him into making a second summon. So we'll start off with the Forceful Sentry. Forceful Sentry is like Confiscation, but it doesn't cost any life points, and one of the cards in his hand ends up going back into the deck. So let's take a look at what my opponent has. All right. So he has Yata, Elf, MST, and Raigeki. Wow, I'm actually in a really awesome position here because this is the type of hand that I can really incentivize my opponent to make an aggressive play. Because if I keep him with Yata, he's going to want to Raigeki my face down, MST my back row, and then make a push, and then I can counteract that pretty well myself. So, yeah, I'm in a really... This is actually really good. I might take the Gemini Elf, and then on his following turn, if he summons the Yata, I can Torrential, and then search my own Yata, and then he loses. I'm going to assume that back row is either Drain or Judgment. If I have the MST at the ready, it's not going to really matter. I could just set my own MST. He is going to MST my MST, and I can chain it on his either Magic Drain or Solemn Judgment. He's then going to summon Yata-Garasu and Raigeki my face-down Witch, in which case I would then search my own Yata-Garasu. I'd be able to MST anything that he would set, summon Yata, and attack for 200. Then his hand would be... The Elf would be gone, so it would be just the card that he drew on that following turn, and then he would be drawing with both of my Torrentials still in my hand. So if you were to draw any monster, I would just be able to Torrential Tribute and just Yata lock him. So this is an interesting one, right? So let's just work through that one more time, just to make sure we're following the right path. If I take his Gemini Elf, and I just go set MST, set Witch, he's going to MST the MST. I can chain that on his back row. He's going to summon the Yata. He's going to attack. He either is going to Raigeki me, or he's just going to attack with a Goblin Attack Force. He's probably going to Raigeki me there in case it's one of the Fiber or Cyber Jars. This Witch, though, is going to search for my own Yata. He is then going to pass the turn with Goblin Attack Force on the board with one unknown card in his hand, because he will have used the Raigeki, the Yata, and the MST on his turn. I won't get a draw phase, but I'll have my own Yata. I can Dark Hole the Goblin Attack Force, and I can summon Yata and attack, and then set my own Torrential Tribute. He's going to have Yata in hand with an unknown, without a draw phase. So if the best thing he can do is summon Yata, I can Torrential it, and then he's in the Yata lock. It seems pretty good. It seems a little risky, though. I could just honestly set both of my Torrential Tributes. It's not impossible for Sean to make a play where he's going to pro Storm or pro Harpy Feather Duster me. He's definitely the type of player that would be doing something like that. So if I were to set both of my Torrential Tributes and this were to be one of those two cards, I'd be in a really bad position. There's actually also the universe where this could be Imperial Order, but I don't think he would have set just Imperial Order if he had MST in hand. And the reason why I'm afraid of Imperial Order briefly is in my play where I Dark Hole the Goblin Attack Force. Obviously the Dark Hole wouldn't go through if that's Imperial. So I'm actually going to pick Elf, and I'm going to make a play where I'm allowing my opponent to hit me with the Yata. And I think because of the two Torrential Tributes in my hand, I'll be able... Oh. I think he realizes it goes into deck, yeah. Yeah, this is super risky. There are a lot of things that can go bad here. Just allowing your opponent to attack. I should also note that if he were to attack with the Goblin Attack Force, which I think is quite likely. Let's see what happens here. That it goes to defense mode. I mean, I'm dark holding a defense position Goblin Attack Force. We'll see. I think with MST, Regeki, and Yata, he is so... Wow, he drew another elf. Okay. I mean, this is fine too. This is actually better, all things considered. Now I can dark hold both of these. And I think I'm in a much better place, actually. I did see him shuffle, though. Is he going to attack for 23? Probably. Now I can just MST dark hold Yata lock him, and the game is over, because his hand is Regeki, MST, and Yata. So, assuming that back row isn't, I guess, Imperial Order? So he's not attacking with the Goblin Attack Force. That's fine. So he is setting this MST. Okay. I think that's fine. I know what this is, so I should just go to draw phase. Because his hand is Raigeki and Yata. Yeah. I don't want to just play Dark Hole in case that's Solemn. Oh, I just drew another MST? Okay, well that solves the whole problem. So now I'm just going to MST his back row that's unknown. Magic Cylinder, sure. Play Dark Hole. Summon Yata. And that's game. I'm going to set 2 Torrentials. He cannot deal with both of them. Yata goes to hand, and I end my turn. So we can MST1 and play Yata, and I Torrential it, and I will eventually, on my behalf, draw Call of the Haunted or Premature Burial. So I'll eventually have enough life in my with the ability to attack to win. So this was actually a somewhat interesting set, because now, I mean, he's going to play this out, but now if I MST, I don't know which one necessarily is the MST. Like, he could have just set Regeki. He's totally inclined to do that. This drop-off, though, in the long run is going to be really useful, because I'm going to be able to set the drop-off on a turn that I draw a Gemini Elf or any other monster in my deck that can deal remote damage beyond where we are right now. So, at this point, can I kill you? Eventually. I'll show you. The answer to that is... I'm explaining to him that I eventually will draw a real monster. Yeah, I mean, in the long run, I could just draw a bunch of cards. Like, I'm just going to show him. Yeah, he's admitted defeat, right? I'm going to show him. I'm eventually going to draw. So 2, 3, 4. So there's 1. So that would be enough right there. Right there. 4 in. Double MST. Yeah. Drop off and normal up. So that's Yata for you. You know, so much of the games back in 2003 and then even a little bit past that was, how can you survive? How can you avoid getting Yata locked? Cards like Regeki were so powerful, but as you saw here, Regeki doesn't do anything against Yata. Neither does Dark Hole. Neither does Snatch Steal. Neither does Change of Heart. There are so many power cards back then that don't do anything to Yata. So it's really one of those things where at all points of the game, you think you could have a ton of card advantage, but if all of your cards are super reactive to monsters on the board and not necessarily counteracting Yata, you could just lose a game like this. I mean, this game was decided really early, all based on Yata.